Welcome back, strange crew. You are tuned into another trip through life's deep cuts. We hope you enjoy the ride.
Keep it strange.
In 3, 2, 1, we are rolling. Hiya! No, I'm just joking. I won't do it. I won't do it. The long-anticipated interview with Linda Pelletier. Welcome to the show. What is up?
I'm excited to be here.
I'm pumped.
So great to see
Fucking
you.
7 years plus in the making. You're like the
know.
reason the show exists. You didn't even know.
I feel like I'm meeting, well, like I know we've met before, but it's so great to have like this it's almost like a historical figure in a way, like such a key person in Kate's lore.
It's so true. I
music.
talk
It's
about
so
you,
great.
I think, every episode. So
Yeah, no, 100%. Like even way back from our earliest episodes, you've been brought up. So
all right, Strange Crew, if you're just tuning in, hello, welcome to the show. We are so excited to bring you this interview. Me and Linda, we've been friends for what, like 20 years, close to, if not longer. If you've been listening to the show over the past 7 years, then you know probably lots about Linda. But if you don't, we're here to tell you a little bit more about it. Linda's been a force in my world for, again, 20 years and helping people learn about music, feel safer in spaces that host music. I mean, you do everything from fashion, art, you kind of do it all. So you're a badass. And I think for me, why it was so important to have you on the show is there's so many people that also have that same experience with you, where you've really opened your arms and the doors, both figuratively and literally, to people that they never would have been able to go out and see shows if it wasn't for you.
Wow, that's
So sorry to put you on the spot and to give you compliments, but you're getting them today.
yes.
Because
I'm so bad at that. I'm
We
like,
love Linda.
yeah, but you've always kind of been a giver. So let's talk about that a little bit. Talk to us a little bit about how you got into music.
God, I feel like that's been 2 million lifetimes ago, but I've always liked music since I was a kid because my brother is a musician and he's a drummer. And when I was a kid, his bands used to jam in our basement. So as a little girl, I would sit at the top of the stairs and watch the long hairs jam and like go down when they weren't around and like play on the instruments because we had like an unfinished basement that had like drum gear and music gear there. And when my brother wasn't home, I would go and listen to his music collection, which was kind of like everything from Iron Maiden to like John Williams' Star Wars soundtracks and like, you know, like jazz, like kind of everything. Because he was into, he was learning jazz drumming at the time. So there was like a lot of different types of music that I was listening to. And my mom always really liked music. My dad was into like really old country, like Johnny Cash and stuff like that. And when I was a little girl, I got to go see Johnny Cash at Harbor Station. That was my first concert that I ever saw in my life. So
Kind of set the tone for your music trajectory.
Yeah, I was like, you know, they couldn't find a babysitter for me, so I just went with them, which I thought was like pretty incredible because, you know, Johnny Cash was pretty amazing. And so, yeah, I think my love of music started at a very, very young age. Because I used to think in music. Like, I think in music. Like, if I'm walking into a room for the first time and I'm super nervous, like, I always, like, play a song in my head, like, to get me through that, like, horrible moment when you're, like, starting a new job or whatever, and you're, like, really, like, nervous. It's, like, I just put on
Helps
music.
you get your bearings.
Yeah, and it's, like, also when I'm really stressed out, like, at work, if there's something, because I work in a very stressful industry and I'm feeling overwhelmed, I will walk away for a moment and put on like Metallica or something just to like breathe and be like, okay, it's all good, breathe, you know, relax, it's going to be fine. So music is very, very, very important to me on so many levels.
That's so interesting. This is the first, like, when you say, like, I put a song on, like, in my head, that I do that all the time. It's almost like it's like the radio station that's in my brain.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like my life soundtrack in a way. So it's this, you're the only person I've ever heard that does that as well. I'm sure other people do, but I'm glad. I'm like, this is weird. But
I always think that too. I'm like, am I weird? Like, I see someone fall and I'm like playing a song in my head. Like, it's like, oh no, that's like horrible. I should be like, well, I'm like, are they okay? But it's like, I just see, like, it's funny because I'm not in love with musicals. But I like see life, like, I don't know, like music has helped me through so many different like terrible things in my life.
Yeah, of course. And I think too, I'm the same with musicals, but I understand like based on, you know, your job in the industry and making such beautiful things that there's obviously method to the madness, and like seeing how much hard work goes into set design and bringing beautiful things to life. I feel that kind of definitely goes back to how we met. And, you know, just to give anybody who hasn't heard, you know, the story, like I can remember being like 13, 14 years old and just really getting into music, things that weren't what my dad listened to, weren't what everybody at school was listening to. And, you know, I remember, you know, the printer at school only did black and white, and it was me like printing out photos of the bands that I liked and putting them on a Bristol board and like trying to find my sense of individuality. And I remember Studio 112 at the time was like always hosting shows, and sometimes they would do all ages shows. And when they would happen, it was like this breath of fresh air for me, because I actually felt like I'd found people that were like me and I didn't feel as isolated. But Linda was the person who would help other people like me that weren't douchebags and would help them get into shows and would, you know, keep us under the radar if there were liquor inspectors or people around, because they were just like, don't be a douchebag. Don't be, you know, a heat score, and like just come out and enjoy the bands, enjoy the shows.
I'd be like, here's the path to the basement if the cops come.
If they come, here you go. And that's the truth. That's literally how I got.
Don't drink.
That's how I got to see Matt Mays. I was 18 years old. That's how I got to see Matt Mays for the first time. It was because people would vouch for me, and it was Linda. It was you working so hard to, one, put on shows that were fucking awesome, and everything from the way that you did poster production to the way that you curated the front of house experience. I don't know if people still talk to you about that, but that is still very prolific and very important in a lot of people's brains. And it's how I think a lot of people, especially in the Maritimes, think about running shows. And whether it's the New Haven Music Hall or whatever it is, it always comes back to Linda. So I don't know if you know that, but now you should, because your name is circulated around so much based on how things should be done. Doesn't mean that they get done that way. They should. But I think people always say, well, look at what Linda did and look at all the things that you were now able to do based on that experience. And I just think you got to talk about it sometimes.
So how did you get into putting on shows? Like, how did you go from watching the long hairs on the stairs to organizing shows locally?
I mean, that was kind of a long path. I mean, my brother was a musician, like I said, and I would see him, like, coming back, like, playing shows, and he'd play shows at wherever venue, and he would be getting, like, ripped off by a promoter. Like, I'd hear him complain, like, oh, you know, this promoter left without paying us, and you know, I would hear all these shady stories about promoters. So then when I was in university, I started, like, I was really into photography, and I started taking photography courses, and I was studying, like, archaeology or anthropology and journalism. I actually went to school to be a psychiatrist, but that didn't last. So then I would write for the paper and take photos, and then for the school paper, and then I would go to shows, and that would get me into shows, and I would just, like, you know, go around and see all kinds of different things. And then at one point I started working at CHSR at UNB Fredericton, and I got a job as their promotions and event person. So I had to do a lot of fundraising and events, like, to try to fundraise for the station. So I would do things like Battle of the Bands and, you know, shows.
And it fucking rocked, everybody. For if you didn't know, or if, like, we will post some things within the blog portion of it, but like they are still talked about.
But also at that time there was Tanya Duffy and Sean Campbell were running Deleted Scenes, which they were a very important promotions company in Fredericton at the time, and they were doing a lot of all ages shows. And they were doing all kinds of interesting things. And, you know, I was going to some of their shows at Bugaboo Creek and all kinds of stuff like that. And a guy named Andrew Drew, he was in, I believe, I forget what band he was in. But they were also doing, like, really good, like, metal shows and stuff. So I was kind of doing shows for the radio station at the time. And, you know, was kind of working, like, trying not to do the same things they were, and, like, working with them.
Complimentary.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then
we can relate.
Then I started, like, getting into the Elks Club, because I wanted I wasn't a fan of like, a bunch of like drunk people in the bar so much all the time. I wanted to be able to give all ages shows so that younger people could, continue to play music and continue to be an important part of the scene and not just like people that were in their like 30s, 40s, or 50s or whatever. I wanted people to be able to see music, but putting on all ages shows is very expensive because you have to rent the venue, you have to rent a sound system, you have to, it's a huge overhead. So we all kind of started doing shows at a place called the Elks Club, and I became an elk so I could get a discount on the room. And then I started getting really busy and started getting lots of emails from bands and all kinds of things like that. So I decided to, with the radio station stuff, I couldn't do everything I wanted to do. So I decided to start a promotions company. And then I found out like all these things, like, when I started booking bigger acts, it was like, oh, you owe us like HST or you have to pay like SoCan. And there was all these like business things that I was like, oh no, like I'm getting all these bills for things. Like I just wanted to throw on some shows and have like some people come and enjoy music. But it became a lot more than that in the way that I had to sort of get an HST number and, learn how to do books and get an accountant and all that kind of stuff. So then once I was at CHSR for a bit, I was in Fredericton. I got a job. I had to move to St. John. So I got a job as the station manager at CFMH at UMB St. John. And when I started there, they hadn't had like a station manager for probably like a year or so, because like I think like a few years before they had a really strong team of Judd Crandall, Troy Chenier, Dave Ellman, and Derek Wirtz. And at that point, I think the station was very strong because they were doing a lot for it. But then like something happened, and there was a good year where they didn't have like a full-time station manager. And so when I got there, it was kind of a lot, and I was like, oh my God, this is insane. So I spent a long time trying to get like the radio station incorporated and different things like that. And then while doing that, I was also doing shows. At that time too, there was someone here named Dan Jones and Trish. They had Route 66, and Jill Langtang, who was a really important part of the music scene, was doing shows as well. And Chuck Teed from Ermine was doing Barbecue Records, and Jason Vautour and Jason Ogden and all those people were, really important to the scene. But at like some point, Jason moved to Halifax, and Chuck Teed had moved away, and there was and Dan Jones was not doing as many shows. And then, so I was noticing that there was like a hole in certain kinds of music that weren't being filled. So I guess it kind of started to just kind of became a full-time thing for me. I didn't plan on it to be that way, but I was just getting emails from bands, and I was just like, doing like shows. I started maybe like doing 2 times a week, and then, I was starting to do shows at Studio 112, and then, Jill became part of us because we were like, let's all work together.
Shout out to our high kick buddy, Jill.
Jill
if you're
Langtang.
Listening, I hope you are, because your buds are on a show together.
But Jill Langtang was a very important part of the St. John music scene for a very long time, and she still is. Like, Jill
big
is
time.
like a special treasure, so Jill was a big part of it, and Brian McGinnis was my business partner. And, then at one point Adam Kierstead joined us, and Adam Kierstead is the best because he's, at the door, he's incredible. He's great with money. Like, he's good at, like, counting money, because a lot of doing shows is, like, math. So, like,
True, yeah.
I mean, Adam was a real treasure that way as well. And, and Sean Boyer, we couldn't have done any of it without Sean Boyer, because Sean and his dad were, like, our sound. And Eric Braun would do sound for us sometimes as well. And, so Sean Boyer was an integral part of our team, because, without Sean, I don't know how it would have happened, because he's an incredible sound person, and we wouldn't have been able to do it without his professionalism and his knowledge.
And his want to do it. I find, whether we're talking about you or Darlene Partridge, like anybody that we even mention, it's because they had a will to want to do it. They wanted to be there. They wanted to chum with people and hang out and talk and put on these events. But you're right, like in business, it does sometimes get very when you have to deal with the HST of it, or billing or space, or just trying to put on something cool for other people. I don't think people understand the logistics of putting on something that seems so DIY. And I think, when we looked at St. John not having a dedicated jam space anymore or a dedicated music venue, I mean, we saw Abby and Sid step up and like go and get loans and they faced it.
And there's a reason why like people often like for years here being like, why don't we have an all ages venue, space?
It's
blah, blah, blah.
expensive.
Because for all those reasons that you've run into expensive, there's like log
you
jams.
always have to be hustling. You always have to be out looking for the next show, selling tickets, helping make sure
Postering.
that
Back then there was not like internet wasn't what it is now. It was like, I spent a lot of time postering, like and getting in a fight with the poster lady. Like people would take our posters down, and it was a constant battle, which I'm sure it still is. Like, I mean, there was all of that craziness too. Like
things evolve, but the community part of what you've built, I think, and also to go back to the role at like campus radio, I think because of what you did, it set precedent for other people that we've known now that have had that position. And it really set like the tone for what it should be, not what it is, but what it should be, and how you can be proactive and reactive to people to help elevate, whether it be their band or just them as an artist. I think that's like really, really important to mention. And I think, when we talk about the posters, you had some really iconic posters. Like, I know we talked a little bit before the episode, guys. We were just saying that you had unfortunately had a flood. I know myself, like I lost everything that I owned, like from probably 20 and on. So I don't have anything that like, I don't know, baby pictures, things like that. I don't have those things. But I'm sure if you're listening to the show and you have Medusa Productions or you have anything that Linda produced, could you send it to us, tag us, post them on Facebook, send it to our email, DM it to us. We would love to see them and also try to get a little bit more of an archive of stuff for you just to get that back. So if you do have it, please make sure to send us that email with your photos, your memories. We'd love to hear it and make sure that Linda gets them, because it's just fun. It's fun to talk about those things.
Because there was like a lot of artists too that I would get to do. Because, I mean, I wasn't great at Photoshop or anything at that time. So I remember I did this show at the House Club in Fredericton, and it was so awful. I would cut out like magazine. And cut out things in a magazine.
Shit was hard back then, guys. It was hard.
But then they would look terrible. Like you'd go to this X-Rocks place. Like
now it's called Indie Sleaze template on Canva.
And then you cut them out of a magazine and
remove background. God, don't we all wish we had that 20 years ago?
Then I started getting artists like Judd Crandall, Derek Wirtz, Coral Yeti, and
phenomenal people.
Halifax would do so because Jill was very good friends with him. And I remember he did these glow in the dark posters at one point.
That is so cool.
He was incredible. And we did so many shows that, I couldn't, we had to get different people all the time or else it was
they look too similar. Yeah.
And Judd Haynes from Winter Sleep had done our website, which was really great because he's an incredible graphic designer. And, there were so many different people that would make posters. I remember Dan Chamberlain and Sean doing an event at Taps, and they did a great poster. There were so many people at that time that were so important to the music scene, and that I don't think I could have done these shows without those people's support. Even people like Doug Anderson and Gina,
that's
they
true.
went to every show, and they were so supportive. Darlene Partridge was our scene mom, and was so helpful and just the best person you could ever meet in your life. She's just so magical. And then, there was just so
I
many
have to make a shout out to Darlene, because Darlene, she's been in both of our lives for a few decades now at this point. I remember meeting Sarah for the first time at the mall and just being like, holy shit, she is so cool. Oh my God, all of her friends are so cool. And me, I'm just pretty much a poser at this point. They call me Fakelin, right? They didn't, but people at school did. And, obviously I'm still not over it, but one of the things I was should I get some gargoyle tattoos? I really wanted to fit in. And one of the things that I found was that I remember going to an all ages show and meeting Sarah, and meeting Darlene, and becoming fast friends with them. And then, within the year, going to their home on the East Side and having Christmas dinners and just being part of it. But there was something so inclusive about her picking me up in the PT Cruiser and just having a smoke. you know, and like picking us all up and like hanging out.
This is
Terry, Terry was in the car half the time. And fun fact, like she was my aunt. Terry, like Van Weston, that was my aunt. So her and Darlene were best friends. And I was like, wait, you hang out with my aunt Terry? This is a very small world. And she would just pick us up and we would go to like a battle of the bands, or she'd be like, yeah, we're going to go watch the Thelema show at, you know, Studio 112. And that part of my life is why I do what I do. So when we talk about shout outs to like you and Darlene and Jill, like it's really why we do the work that we do. And I think it's also cool, like when you talk about like barbecue records and like everything has evolved. It may have changed, but people that care are still out hustling and doing that same thing.
Well,
and they're pushing their knowledge onto the next generation of people.
Yeah, like that was so interesting as you guys are chatting, like all of these names that I recognize, right? There's some you said moved away, but I believe a lot of them are back here now,
and
right?
And, you know, we've got new like monopolized records. We have like, so there's people that are still feeding those ecosystems and showing them how to run a recording studio or how to run a proper label or how to run a show or how to do sound. And then people like Corey Bonavie and like Abby at like Haven are out teaching people how to do sound to do your own show. So in case you don't have someone, now they're teaching people to go do it. And like having festivals like Quality Block Party and things like that, I think it was because they had things to lean on that you and people like Darlene and Chuck had really built. So I think it's important to give credit where it's due. And
because Chuck did a lot, like
he
still way before I
does,
lived here, like. I remember, like, when I lived in Fredericton, I was thinking about, I used to think of St. John as, like, you know, like the heavy metal city, even though, like, it's really not anymore at all. But, like, I remember Chuck was doing so much, like, in Draft Cycle and, you know, him and Jason Ogden and all those, like, Hospital Grade. Like, they played at, you know, CBTGs in New York for like, you know, and, like, Jason Ogden also was very important to the music scene. Adam Mowry, like, Port City All-Stars, like Joanna Killen, like, you know, they were all such important parts of the scene. And Pierre Cormier and Alex Keeler, like the organizers, like they were always playing shows. Like Shelley Brown, like she's super important to the scene also. Like there are so many moving parts and so many important characters. Like I remember not wanting to move to St. John actually, because I used to see St. John as like I had to come here when my mother was dying of cancer, and I used to see it as a terrible place, and I didn't want to be here. And I used to think of it as like, oh, this place is horrible. Like, I don't want to live here. I don't want to, because I wanted to go to fashion school in Montreal, and then stuff happened that I couldn't go. And it kind of just like, you know, this kind of just happened instead. And I guess at the time I didn't really think of it that it was going to be my job. I just wanted to, for me, music was survival, because I grew up like, you know, pretty poor, and I always had like serious body issues, and you know, I felt like I didn't really fit in anywhere. And I always felt like I had these amazing friends that I had in like, you know, like junior high that were the most amazing people. But like, I always felt like I didn't even quite fit in. Like they didn't like the same music as me. They were different than me. I always felt different than everybody else. And I think at that point in time, you know, I remember when I first would get tattoos, like I remember being at the market and some woman's like, you have man tattoos. Like, and like I remember like, piercings and colored hair. I would always get in trouble at jobs, and you know they'd be like, "Yeah, I'd cover your face," and I had band-aids all over my face. Like, same. And I just like I always felt like I was just not like, you know, I would look at these magazines and look at like metal babes like Lita Ford, and like I would look up to Joan Jett, but I'm like, I will never be those girls because they're like gorgeous babes, and I was just like, you know, I'm just someone who doesn't really quite fit in anywhere. So I felt like music was what made me like, you know, keep going for things, you know, like it was like listening to music, listening to those records, getting through the days with music was kind of what like got me through things, you know. And my friends, like I had really good friends. I was lucky that way. I always had really good friends, and I'm very, very lucky. Like I don't have a lot of things in my life, but I am rich in friends and meeting really amazing people. And what I loved about St. John, what I grew to love about St. John was the people. Like I do love port cities. Like I love Detroit, I love Buffalo, and St. John is a city of character. And the people that I met here, I will remember for the rest of my life, because I remember feeling so welcomed when I came here. And I remember being really freaked out when I first got here and like having like newspaper article about how I was here to save the radio station, and I was like, oh my God, this is a lot of pressure. Like, I was 20-something years old, and I had to go to these CRTC hearings, and I was like, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to do this. Like, I didn't know accounting, and I had to do books, but I taught it to myself, and I remember being really scared, like, I'm going to fail, and these people are going to hate me. Like, every day I was like, I'm going to fail, this is going to not work out, but I met so many incredible people here, like, that I will never forget in my life, like, just like, and even now, like, I see people like Pierre still playing, and, and Alex Keeler and like Chris Braden and Jason and Adam, all those people are still playing music, and they're amazing. Like, it's like, they are incredible musicians, and they're incredible talents, and like, the music I would hear at the Jam Space was amazing. Like, that was a sacred, magical place. And I believe jam spaces are sacred, magical places.
Yeah.
It's where music begins. It's where, people are jamming. And it's like, and the people at the jam space also they were not the kind of musicians who were like, oh, I'm doing this to get big. They were doing it because they loved music.
Yeah, or like experimenting with something. That was one thing I always appreciated about Boyer, is that he was never pigeonholed into one type of music. He had like 1,800 bands, and like each one was different. Mm-hmm. And I loved how like computer savvy he was, and just how intent he still is on providing good service to the industry, whether that's its sound at Imperial or like the shows that he plays. I've always thought that, the people here, they really do go above and beyond for each other. And I also think it's interesting when we're talking about like, maybe it's not the right word, but like stereotypes and like fitting in. And I found that when I was like in middle school, like my dad was very into a lot of different music, but one of the things that he told me is like, don't get caught up in saying you don't like a certain genre of music just because it sounds cool to someone else. He's like, you're allowed to like country music and not not certain types of country music, but you don't need to say, oh, I don't like country because it sounds cool to your metal friends. He's like, it'll make you well more versed if you understand the plethora of music. And one of the things I always appreciated about you versus some of my very, very like intent on metal friends was like, there was no room to listen to bands like Fish or to listen to a band like Matt Mays. It just had to be very strictly like fucking death metal all the time, or like it was nothing, right? And I like having the variety of both. And one of the things I loved about you is that you never shamed me or anybody based on the show they were coming to. And I've seen a lot of that in the last 10 or so years, where people are very, they keep it as their whole identity, how they dress, how they put themselves online. Like, luckily we didn't have social media at that time, because it would have been even harder to find our individuality, right? Because we wouldn't have known how to deal with it. And I think that, when I was coming down for like a Brian Byrne show, I remember like coming down for that. And I think it was like Barracuda Sunrise was opening for them. There was maybe 20 or 30 people at Studio 112. I was thrilled because I was a big I Mother Earth fan. And Linda was like, yeah, pop down. They're going to be playing. I can get you in. I was thrilled about it. All that to say that 20 years later, we ended up managing Brian Byrne and his wife, Tara, this past year. So it's funny how full circle that comes in. And even funnier, that night, we ended up hanging out with the guys after the show. And we told him, I was like, oh, I'm really excited to see Matt Mays. He's coming in a few weeks. And he called him. We were outside of the Courtney Bay Hotel. And he called Matt Mays and was like, hey, Matt, I'm here with a couple of friends, Kate and Linda. And, they're going to be at your show in St. John. So, like, if you see them, say hi. And I was just like, I was blown away by this. And I think it's funny now, like, I'm 36, and I think back to that. Like, that was a very intense moment for me when I think back to it. And I love how you never, ever, like, we could be listening to Iggy Pop, and we could be also, like, listening to, like you said, Johnny Cash, and both be as fucking awesome at the same time. And I think people need to have room for different things, right? And for me, like, I never played instruments, so I made music my thing as well. And we talk about that a lot on the show, because we were not great. We wish we could rip the guitar and that we were like metal babes or whatever. But this is my studio.
Yeah, we can play a stereo and can work a roadcaster.
You know what I mean? But I think like it's so important to make room for music. And I don't see that as much of an issue with younger people, but I think older people, we got really set in our ways of things that we like, right? Even when we ask the question like, what are your 3 albums? People get like, oh my God. Like, even me, I think like, if I don't say Nirvana, does my love of Nirvana go away? Like, no, it just changes based on how you evolve as a person. And I just think it's worth mentioning that. Like, it's funny because, you know, we may all look a certain way, but we have so much room for different varieties of artists and music, which brings me to my next question. So we had talked a little bit about this because we're going to see Amyl and the Sniffers next year. And Linda actually got to see them quite a few times back in the day. So I want to talk a little bit about this because I am so excited. They're my favorite band right now. Well, for the past couple of years. And you've seen them in what, 2017?
2017, yeah. They played at a bar in
Guys, like
Toronto
what?
called Hard Luck, which is like a really, like they're a bar that actually puts on like live music. And they still survived through the pandemic, which is like a lot of bars that hosted bands have closed down in Toronto over the years. It's a completely different city in a lot of ways. But Hard Luck, it's like, you know, you go up a million stairs. It's this, I'd say there's probably, you could probably fit 300 people in there, but there wasn't 300 people there that night. And it was, 2017, they played at Hard Luck. And I was like, wow, this band is incredible. And at that time they had an EP that was out.
Yeah.
And I remember like getting to talk to them, and it was like, they weren't big, like they were just like a touring band. And then I saw them every time they've come to Toronto. I saw them before COVID. They played at Velvet Underground. That was an incredible show. And then I got them to sign my vinyl, and got to like talk to them, and they were incredible. I've seen them every time they played. The last time I saw them actually was one of the most meaningful times because it was at Danforth Music Hall. It was July of, I guess not the year that just went by. It would have been 2023. The years, I'm so bad with years. And it was, because it was 2023. And they were playing at Danforth Music Hall. It was like a Thursday night. And with the work that I do, it's sometimes hard to be like, I'm going to come to the show because, you know, film is not an industry where you can plan things. So I was like, maybe I'll get to go, maybe I won't. But I never ended up buying a ticket because it didn't look like I was going to go. And then, you know, like I got like a health scare. I had a health issue, and, you know, I was about to have to be like gone out of like, you know, be in treatments for about a month and a half, 2 months. And at the same time, film was going on strike because the actors and writers were going on strike. And I remember that day, being at work, and they were like, okay, we're going on strike. And like a few days later, I was starting my medical treatments, and I was like, you know what? I need to go rock out to Amyl and the Sniffers. So I went online, like all the tickets were crazy amounts of money. But then someone ended up messaging me and being like, my friend is selling 2 tickets for face value. So a friend of mine came with me, and I rocked out to Amyl and the Sniffers. And I remember just feeling like, wow, like my work is gone. I don't know when it's coming back. And, you know, I had to do this crazy life-changing thing very shortly. But I get to see Amyl and the Sniffers. And I felt like that was a very special show for me because I felt that it was just going to be the last time that I was going to really, like, get to see something for quite a while. And, you know, not knowing what my future was holding, it was just really a great, like, okay, I'm going to rock out and then tomorrow's a new day kind of thing. But it was actually really incredible to see them that night because they were incredible, as they always are. And Amyl is just, she's a machine. Like, she's like, I don't know, I'm obsessed.
And what are
with
your
her.
thoughts now? Like, so having seen them in 2017 and then every other year now, and then seeing how they're like really popping off at festivals, like what are your thoughts about seeing them in May?
I mean, I'm super stoked because it's like, I'm really happy for them because I'm not one of these people that, like, I remember hearing all these people years ago, they would get mad if the band they liked became popular. And I'm like, I mean, it sucks in the way that, okay, you can't get tickets to them as easily.
It's like how I feel about Limp Bizkit. Everybody's jumping on the Limp Bizkit train, but I've been on it for years.
Yeah.
I was bullied for it, and now all the girls are like, oh my God, girly pop. And it's like, no, I've been down with the Bizkit for years, okay? But I was also one of those people who's like, oh, not when they were popular. It was kind of funny, so I'll
when
stop.
I was younger, I feel like I was a little bit more like that. But now as I get older, I'm like,
The
who
more the
cares?
merrier, yeah.
Like one of my top songs last year was Miley Cyrus, Flowers, because I obsessively listened to it for 2 months. So it's like, you know, like I don't feel that way about things anymore. And I just want people to be successful. And, you know, I'm like, good for them. Like, I hope they, like, you know, beat out Taylor Swift for the biggest concert in the world. Metallica is the biggest concert in the world that happened in Russia. So I'm not a Taylor Swift fan. So I want everyone to beat her and everything. So, I mean, I shouldn't say that. She's a female that's a good business person, so I shouldn't put her down. But
well, root for the underdogs, though, right?
Yeah.
You know what
and
I
it's
mean?
like, I mean, to me, I see Taylor Swift as like the all-American girl. She came from a rich family. It's like, you know, she's a great business person, and I do really respect her for that. But I think she's a mediocre guitar player, and I think she's a mediocre singer. She's a great performer. She puts on 2-hour concerts. Like,
And I think she's a very
Great.
good songwriter. That's
Yeah.
where I am a newly converted Swiftie, and from folklore on. And yeah, like yeah, you got to respect it, right? At the same time, she was my number one on Spotify.
Boring.
I mean,
Just
man,
joking.
Yeah, oh man.
But I mean, it's up. I think that music is like, we all have our tastes, and it's like people are allowed to like whatever they like, and it doesn't matter as
that's
long
true.
as it's not hurting anybody, right?
And it's like my number two was friggin' like, I think like Iggy Pop or Bob. Like it's like one of those, and it's so interesting when I've seen people be like, oh, I don't want to post mine, or like people photoshopping there. It's like, who gives a shit? Like, it's music's music, right? And if you're that uptight about what people think about what you're listening to, one, you don't have to fucking share it, or two, just it's fucking music. If anyone's judging you for it, you don't want to associate with them
right.
anyway.
Like, I mean, my top artist, I think, was Amon and the Sniffers, but like, I remember my like third most listened to song was Flowers by Miley Cyrus.
Yeah.
And Nothing Else Matters by Miley Cyrus, because I think that's a beautiful version of the song. And I think that it doesn't matter what music we listen to as long as it's invoking something in us. Like, and sometimes I just want to listen to mindless music because I don't want to think, you know?
Yeah, that's
Like,
fair.
But like, I think for me, I might be too old for Taylor Swift. I find her songwriting a little bit immature, and I think I'm too old. Maybe that's
That's
it's
right.
like
Some
how
of her
Harry
older
Potter
stuff,
is. Like,
like
I'm too old for Harry
her
Potter.
older stuff. No, like I can't. But I really love her new album, Tortured Poets Department. Folklore is really good. Evermore, Midnight's was good. But I agree. Like some of her older stuff, like I haven't.
Before we wrap up, I'm curious. So I know Amel and the Sniffers is like top. It's going to be fucking awesome in 2025. But before we wrap up, could you tell me a few more of your favorite performances you've ever seen?
Oh wow! That's
And I
tough.
also want to know a bucket list. And they can be past. It can be impossible. It can be a bucket list.
I mean, one of my favorite live bands is Go-Go Bordello.
They are good. I saw
They
them with
are-
you at Rockfest, and they
They
were
are
pretty
everything.
amazing.
Yeah, like I love Eugene, and especially too, like their performances are so punk rock, especially because they're Ukrainian
Yeah.
and with everything that has been happening in the world. Like they are a political band, but they are amazing. Like I got to see a small show with him playing with Lemon Bucket Orchestra at Lee's Palace, and Lee's Palace is not a giant venue in
I've
Toronto.
been there before.
It's legendary, but it's not huge, right? And he was there with Lemon Bucket Orchestra, and it was like a Ukrainian Christmas fundraiser. And I couldn't believe that he was in such a small room. And in the same venue, I got to meet Keanu Reeves and see Dogstar, so that was pretty legendary.
And so, fun fact, when we were in Toronto last year, you were talking about potentially going to this concert, not sure if you were going to be able to get the time. You got it, and you were like, I'm wearing the fucking T-shirt. I'm going. And then I remember seeing you, and like you got the set list. And like she was worried she wasn't even going to get to go, guys. And here, yeah, of course, you're like me. You're just like, no. And you taught me well.
Well, my best friends actually, like for my birthday that year, 3 of my best friends pooled their money together and got me a VIP ticket.
Yeah, it's
So
wild.
I was
Shout
pretty,
out
like,
Keanu
stoked.
Reeves. You're changing lives. One film, one album at a time. Keanu, you were the
It is
man.
my dream to work on a Keanu Reeves film. Like that is my absolute dream, and to be his personal dresser would be my absolute.
Well, we're putting it out there,
goal.
Strange Crew. Make sure to tag Keanu Reeves in the comment section. Tag it everywhere. Let him know that Linda is an on-set. Why don't you just before we wrap up? Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about what you do? Because I think it's actually really interesting the way that you talk about fashion school and like some of the things that you've done. Because it actually really all evolves into what you do now. Kind of like how I sought out. Like I thought I was going to go to university, and I never sought out to run a marketing and PR business for music and brand. I never would have thought that, right? But sometimes your likes and the things that make you and the things that you give to other people kind of make your livelihood. So tell us a little bit just before we go about your job.
Well, my job is
Because we got to get Keanu on the scene, guys. Keanu's got to come. He's coming to St. John. We're hanging out. This is what's up. Or
My
Toronto,
job
doesn't
is
matter.
like I'm a costumer. So costume department is a huge department. Like you can do so many different positions within that department. I did go to school in Newfoundland for textiles, so I do know how to I know how to construct things, and I know how to dye things, and textiles like in Newfoundland was very much like you have to use natural fibers. It's like it was a great experience to go to school there for textiles. And in costumes, there are so many different positions you can do. Like the one I just did, I came here right now to work on a TV show called Revival. I think it's the first huge TV show that's been in St. John for a long time. Hemmings House brought it along with Vol.167 Productions. And on that show, I was the set supervisor for costumes, which is a crazy position. It's very long, crazy hours. And when you're on set, you're sort of responsible for, making sure that the vision of the designer comes to life and is how they wanted it to come to life. So, you have to make sure that they're in the right costume. There's continuity, like crazy continuity. You have to make sure that they're in, because we don't shoot things in order in film. You shoot it usually often based on location. Yep. So you could be shooting something from episode 1 and then the next minute shooting something from episode 4. And so you have to make sure that they're in the same costumes.
Yeah, like if there's a tear in the blouse, you have to be very specific. And I remember you telling me about that, and I was like, you don't think sometimes about the logistics of what that means. You might think, oh, it's just so you're making sure people are in the right clothes, but it's more than that. Like when you were talking about the breakdown of things and like making sure that things have like the same imprints of like a tire, like it's so important, because if you could pick up on it, so can an audience.
Yeah. Especially because if you're not, like, you're shooting a scene and then, you've shot it in September, then you shot it again in December. You have to make sure, like, especially if it's a show that has blood and, it's gritty, like you have to match the blood to what it was on that day. So you have to do anything with blood or gore, you have to have multiples and you have to match them. And that can be a bit that can be very difficult. And one of my favorite positions within costumes is actually something called breakdown, where I see breakdown as telling the story of the character. Because, you buy clothes, it's brand new. I mean, that's a whole other position too, as a buyer. You go and you buy things for the designer. And it's not just, buying is a very hard job because you have to find specific things at specific times and it's very stressful. But then that would then go into the breakdown department and you have to try to make it look aged. Because if someone is has been on the road, been kidnapped and they're 50 days in the same costume, it has to look like that.
like that.
You can't have a prestige shirt. Oh, why is your shirt prestige?
Yeah.
So that's all. I mean, on set, you do a lot of that as well. Like, you do have to do the blood and some of the sweat, but then a lot of it would go through a breakdown department or, a special effects, a building department as well, where you build, create things. And there's, some shows where you have super suits and then you have to create those. And then there's positions like background coordinator, where you're in charge of, what the background is wearing. And, there's a lot of moving parts in film, and there's a lot of different positions. There's also, you can be a tracker, which is, money, dealing with money. The costume designer, assistant costume designer, there's just so many different positions. And I've done a lot of them because I feel that to be a good costumer, you have to be well-rounded.
Yeah, you have to understand the dynamics and the ecosystem, and that's kind of what we try to do both on the podcast and the marketing agency, is try to understand the whole integrated system, to understand where there can be improvements made, systems can be implemented, and then people, whether they be artists or the company, they're actually getting more profit and they're more sustainable, so to speak, right?
Exactly.
Well, I really appreciate you, chumming with us and hanging out with us on a rainy day, and
Great way to spend the rainy day,
and telling people a little bit about your awesomeness, because I think people need to know more about it. And again, if you have photos or memories or things that you want to share, please put them in the comments. If you're listening, watching, there's lots of space to send it to us, whether it be on the actual post, through our email, in our DMs, whatever you prefer. We'd love to hear from you, Strange Crew. And we really appreciate the time, Linda. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me. I don't know if I think I've told you before, but I am always say no to things like interviews and photographs because I hate looking at myself or watching myself.
We're saying fuck it today, and
but
we're
I've
on
been
it.
saying yes to things now because I'm like, you know what, life is too short. You don't know what's going to happen to you, and you know, if you look back and you see yourself, like for example, during that time, there are barely any photos of me because I was like, oh, I don't want photos. And I remember someone telling me at one point, you will never be hotter or younger than you are right now.
That's good advice.
Here it is
So
15 years
true.
later. I'm
That's
like, I
good
should've got the
advice.
pictures taken when I was 15 years
It's so
younger.
true.
Like, why not? You know?
You know, and then you look at old photos and then you're like, oh, like I hated myself back then, but you're like, I was hot.
I was like, why? I was like small. I thought I was super fat then. I was way smaller than I am now. But it's like, you know, we're never happy with
so
No,
true.
it's so
anything.
true.
But I was like, you know what? I'm going to say yes this time.
Yes, well, we're so glad we're the ones you said yes to. And, and thank you everyone for tuning in. And
Yes, thank you for tuning in, Strange Crew. And until next time, keep
it
it strange. Bye.
Bye.
If you've enjoyed this, then you have to hit strangegrooves.com for more amazing content. To support this podcast and music community, go to patreon.com/strangegrooves. As always, keep it strange.